Hello and welcome. My name is Jacob, also referred to as Saint, and I'm the founder of AllThingsTTRPG as well as the Realm Beyond Westmarch. And in today's episode, I want to go over the rules document of the Realm Beyond, which is the Westmarch server. This video will mostly aim towards newer players who may be a little bit intimidated by this 41 pages long rules document, and especially being new into Dungeons and Dragons, that may calm off a little bit extra, given that role-playing games generally isn't the easiest hobby to get into. Much easier to learn how to play Yahtzee or some card game or something. So anyway, we are gonna go through this. Prerequisite is that you should be decently familiar with Dungeons and Dragons and character creation. But trust me, it's really not that different from normal raw Dungeons and Dragons. So we're gonna start off. We have a little table of contents, which we're not gonna go into detail. We also have the downtimes. I think we're gonna skip the downtimes for now. So we're just gonna go down. First, we have a setting primer. I'm not gonna read all of this. You can read this through on your own. But long story short, the setting takes place in a realm called Shar, which is technically a fabricated realm made by very powerful demons who played gods, essentially. And with that, certain things in the cosmic universe and the multiverses broke. But you can read this through. If there's any lore introduction page, you should probably read this one. If you're more interested in the lore, we got about 45,000 words on World Anvil, everything free of use, so you can just go into our World Anvil. It's linked in the Discord. And then we head down to the actual content here. Yes, we are 18 plus. We do not refrain from mature elements. There will be a lot of gore, there can be sexual content, torture, drug discrimination, and this is not a Westmarch. If you're a minor, you should stay away from this Westmarch, generally. We also incentivize players to not attach too much to the characters, especially early on, since the game is very dangerous. We don't want players who have an established backstory from somewhere else. Maybe you played a character in Eberron or Farron, and you want to bring them over. That is not recommended at all. And if you want to elaborate on a backstory, it's preferred that you wait until level 3. We want the players to be respectful and constructive. Keep toxicity to a minimum. We have tickets. We have a ticket system. If there's any complaints, you can open up a ticket and talk to moderators about it. Keep chats clear. Just because it's an 18 plus server doesn't mean we want people to post a bunch of porn and gore everywhere. And we don't discriminate, no matter your races, creeds, sexual orientations. And no one on the server has any issues with that, and we don't think you should either. Don't spam. Keep channels on topic. Keep discussions in English. Don't ping staff over and over unless necessary. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Just be cool, that's all. If you want to sign up, you use this link here for the team up calendar. I'm just going to open to this page where you can see all the sessions you can sign up for. This is our primary way. Sessions that are posted here will also be announced in a game channel called Game Postings, and you'll likely be pinged. So yeah, don't mute that channel if you want to be informed when games are posted. Session etiquette. Don't argue with the GM mid-session. Bring issues up afterwards. It's one thing if you bring a rule up and the GM says, "Oh yeah, you were right," and you keep going. But it's all about maintaining the flow of the game, trying to not delve too deep into a rules discussion that can take 30-45 minutes. Usually the way I do it, if there's a rule block or something, especially during combat when the stakes are high and a character may die, which is usually when it's the most important, is I tell the player, okay, show me the rule, and then I pass on and I go with some other player. And if the player really, want to make their case, then they'll show me, oh, there's a rule. Okay, well, then we follow that ruling. Because even though the Realm Beyond uses a lot of homebrew rules, we do default to raw unless there's a rule explicitly stated. So generally, rules document, raw rules, second in line. Don't roll dice unless asked to. Don't just roll perception and say, oh, do I see anything? Generally, the GM calls the rolls. So you describe your actions. Oh, I want to look around for traps or whatever you're looking for. Oh, can I check the cabinet? Yeah. Roll perception, roll investigation, whatever the GM will say. Don't metagame. Keep conversations in character as much as possible. I don't think that needs to be elaborated on. It's a role-playing game after all. You could go play Warhammer if you just want to play a tabletop. If your GM calls for a pause or stop, do not move the tokens. And that basically means there may be certain times where characters run around on different places, and one character opens a door. Inside there's 4 goblins all ready to attack them. Then it's like, stop. Nobody move. Something just happened. So don't keep running around at that time. Cheating is a harsh no-go. We've caught a bunch of cheaters. We've banned a bunch of cheaters. Don't cheat. You ruin it for yourself. You ruin it for other players. And generally, why would you play a game if you're only cheating? You get 1 warning, then you're banned. And we don't take appeals to cheating either. Once it's your turn in combat, try to make your actions once it happens. Combat has a tendency to draw out quite much, so knowing what to do when your turn comes up speeds things up a lot, makes you be able to do a lot more fun things in the sessions. Characters are supposedly young adults in relation to whatever race they are. We don't allow any players to play children. If you want to spend downtime, it should happen in between sessions, not when the sessions start. When the sessions start, we want to go at that date, at that time. If you won't be able to use a voice chat, we kindly wish you not to join. It appears as though many Westmarches out there are play-by-post. We are not. We have some play-by-post channels for inter-player activity outside of sessions, but the sessions themselves happens in voice. So if that's the kind of Westmarch you want to play, you may want to look into us. Roll a Die is a channel. It shouldn't be spammed with test rolls. All rolls should be suffixed with this, which basically types out whatever. If you do this symbol and then write work week 1 or something, then it's gonna say work. Or if you rolls for sanity, which is another attribute I'll go into, it's easy for staff to see what you're rolling for. If you just want to spam, then you go to spam. We want the Discord and the players Roll20 name to match. It doesn't mean your Discord ID needs to match. You can change your nickname on our server specifically if you want a different nickname. But in order for assigning character sheets and auditing, it makes it much easier for staff. Yeah. Character creation. So now we're done with the stern, boring, this is how we do things. We can head over to the little bit more fun shit. Restrictions. We run most stuff except these things. So no Unearthed Arcana, no Artificer, no Hexblade, no Econite, no Twilight Cleric, no Peace Cleric, no Dragon Marks, and no Ravnica backgrounds, because the Ravnica backgrounds are just so superior to any other backgrounds. We make sheets with this link. We have a racial unlock system, which basically players who perform well in terms of RP, they roleplay their characters consistently, have a tendency to unlock silver tokens, as we call them. They can be used to unlock more exclusive races. We are not the kind of Westmarch that allow every race to just wander around. We want to integrate the races through lore and history and into the world building so that the rare races actually stay rare. And once you've unlocked a race, the token is consumed and you have one shot on that character. So, for instance, if you want to unlock a Goliath, that's one token. If you want to unlock a Kenku, that's 2 tokens. And then some requires even an expenditure of TRB points because they're like 1 in 10,000. And some may even require you to put some effort into world building or supplying lore for the race. We have integrated a few races at this point, but we also have a collaborative lore building on World Anvil. So any lore that has you've taken into account the current setting, the lore, you understand how it fits in. If you were to submit something, oh, could I add this? You're likely to get it through, maybe after a few revisions. But we are very open to player submissions in that way. Yeah, so the initial races you're most likely gonna play are these ones, and then eventually you will be able to unlock more. And it kind of goes a little bit into we want to get away from the power gaming and the meta gaming, so we want players to show that they can role play. It's like if you play a race that has a certain kind of attitude generally, we want to see that you can role play a human first. It's like if you want to play a drow, which in our setting is pretty evil, pretty devoted to Lolth, and just in general the kind of the evil style. Not all drows, but there are ties, there are racial ties to certain alignments for many of them. So if you can demonstrate that you can play one of the not so hard races to play, then it's arguable that elves should actually be harder to play, but I mean, everybody want to play an elf in a fantasy game. Yeah, and here we start differ a little bit from, this is one of the things that makes TRB unique. We don't start characters at level 3, or maybe we could start them at level 1, but there's basically 2 routes. One route is the commoner route, and one route is the prisoner route. As a prisoner route, you're sent to this realm through a portal. You were death sentenced in the previous realm, whether falsely accused or actually on some grounds. And you basically show up in the world pretty much in tattered rags and nothing. It is what we call the Skyrim start or the Elder Scrolls start. You have nothing, you are a 0. You are a level 1 though, so you have the hit points, you may have some spells, you may have whatever the class has as level 1. So it's just like creating a normal character at level 1, but you don't have any gear really. The second option is starting as the commoner, which is a resident of the plane of Shar, a local, and you start with a lower hit point. You start with 6 hit point plus minus con modifier, unless you're sorcerer, wizard, or something like that. You will probably have a higher hit point. They may start with some gear, but their gear, their entire background is randomized. So if you decide to go on a commoner round, you basically roll on a D100 table, and we have 100 customized backgrounds for our setting, of stretching from everything to cultists, thieves, city guard, baker, all kinds of stuff in there, and you get a background in accordance with whatever you roll. So that is a little more the wild option. Maybe worth mentioning though that commoners get slightly stronger than prisoners when they level up. They have a few extra hit points and about 1 extra skill proficiency. It's not a super big deal, but it's kind of to incentivize players to take that route. We notice that many people who come from normal D&D initially start going prisoners, or here, prisoners. However, after a play, 1 character or 2, they tend to start favoring the commoner route. We also have the Iron Man, which is it is kind of a mixture of both, the worst of both. It's more of like an achievement. If you reach level 3 as an Iron Man character, you get a title, And the Iron Man is basically a level 0 without any gear. So the biggest upside of being a commoner is a starting gear, which you forsake as an Iron Man. So you don't have any gear and your hit points are very low, and yeah, it's very dangerous. For character creation, we use 27 point buy, starting with 15 maximum and 8 point minimum. That increases once you've accumulated 20 TRB, which is after approximately 20 sessions, to an 18 point maximum and a 3 point minimum. Reason for this is if you stay that long in TRB, you're probably a pretty dedicated role player and you're able to role play your stats. We want to see that if you are a character who plays a 6 intelligence, it's not just that you dumped your intelligence to maximize your strength. Your character should actually role play as you have a 6 in intelligence. Same goes for the other attributes as well. And we have seen a bunch of players not doing that, and we find that it ruins verisimilitude to a certain level, so we want to avoid that. We also have a 7th ability score, which isn't spent by point buy, or it can be by subtracting from other things, but usually it's not, which is called sanity. Similar to a lot of Call of Cthulhu games, characters have a sanity, which starts off as 2d6 plus 6, and then they have a min and a max sanity. We're going to go into sanity a little bit later. For intelligence, we find that intelligence in raw is a little bit underwhelming, so characters now gain extra proficiencies in relation to their intelligence. And a little bump for them. And similar goes for charisma. Charisma is very strong with the Hexblade, though. The Hexblade level 1 is completely insane. That's why everybody dips into it. But we have no Hexblade, so we've given charisma characters a discount of 5% for charisma modifier for basic and common items. If you get a proficiency twice, you don't pick a new proficiency. Instead, your proficiency turns into an expertise, similar to that of a rogue. Instead of feats, we use talent trees. I could quickly go over those. They are similar, but different. Let's see if this thing will load. A talent tree, we have skill trees, which are proficiency based, and we have speciality trees. The speciality trees get accessed once you have 3 or you've spent 2 talent points already. So that means that these are unlocked at level 1 as a variant human, or at level 4 as any other race. And if we take an example, athletics for instance, the way they work is you get 1 at level 0, 1 at level 1, and then you can change your ASI similar to feats really. But they have prerequisites. So for instance, let's say you don't have proficiency in athletics, and you spend 1 talent point, and you gain jumper, and you spend the second one where you can choose strapping, chokehold, or brute. Say we go brute here, so we go down jumper, brute, and then once we're level 4, we may want to expand one of our ASIs to get charger, or maybe even the second ASI to get colossus. If you have proficiency, however, you get the baseline for free, meaning that you don't start on this level. This one you get for free since you have the proficiency, but not unless you spend a skill point. So it's basically, if you spend a skill point, then you get any of these 3 plus this one. And yeah, there's a bunch of them. I advise you to take your time, go through this. There's a lot of interesting ways to play, and this talent tree just adds a lot of diversity in terms of play style that I don't find that Raw has. Raw generally tend to go for more of the same 5 feats. So yeah, check that out. Heading down, we have a customized race, a race of our own called the Galdur, which are basically a primitive tribal-like furless rat cat kinda that tend to eat parts and grow stronger by doing so. There's lore on them on the World Anvil if you wanna read that. But yeah, they're basically scavengers, nasty scavengers. Kobold has gotten a slight rework where they got Burrower, Center of Attention. Um, Basically, they don't have the pack tactics thing. Pack tactic thing is, we found that the sunlight sensitivity in the pack thing is very much hit or miss. Whereas if you're in the sun, then you're very weak. Whereas if you're not and you get the pack tactics procs, you're very strong instead. So we kind of average that out. We also have rat folks. They're not very common, but they do exist. Some minor change to lizard folk. We have a few goblin sub races. This is, yeah. Here we start getting into modification of the classes. One of the most broken combos in Raw is the Bear Barbarian and Moon Druid. You do not get any benefits from Rage during Wild Shape. It's just completely silly. If you've ever played in a party comp like that, you gotta have to face so crazy things in order to challenge your party. Or it's more like you have this one person in the party that refused to die, and the rest of the party is just squishy as hell. Path of the Zealot, given that lethality is one of the selling points, Path of the Zealot isn't free, it just halves the cost. Battle Rager available for any raised. The Bear Totem is also slightly nerfed. So instead you roll the damage twice and pick the lowest. Song of Rest requires spending healing pool points instead of hit dice. We don't use hit die, we use healing pools. And healing pools are basically you have an amount equal to half your HP to spend throughout short rests. It refills at the end of the next long rest. So instead of rolling how much you get back, you spend from that pool. Counter Charm we also buffed because that ability is completely useless in Raw. So immediately upon, as a reaction, pretty much, you can make a saving throw as a source of a fear and charm. Artisan's Blessing is slightly more scaled to be useful at higher levels. It does, however, the Blessing of the Forge requires the person to do crafting, and here we comes into downtime. So if you want to be a Forge cleric, you're actually required to forge stuff in order to maintain that bonus. Grave Domain is very strong in order to prevent people from dying, which has gotten a slightly nerf for certain things. However, the Path of the Grave has gotten buffed. Discipline of Life requires action, bonus action, or reaction. What this basically means is that Discipline of Life in combination with Goodberry creates a situation where healing gets very affordable very fast. The Discipline of Life adds bonus to any source of healing, and the good berries are a small amount of healing but multiple sources. So basically, a Life Domain Cleric casting Goodberry, which is a level 1 spell, can heal for 30, I think. We have buffed Champion a bit, because we also find that underwhelming. Battle Masters Know Your Enemy has gotten changed, so it's actually useful in combat. We use the Gunslinger, which is Matt Mercer's version, even though it's non-core. Monks have had a slight buff early game for their key points. And the Way of the Four Elements gain access to their spells a little bit earlier than Raw. Beastmaster is slightly buffed. They can command their pet as a bonus action instead of action, which frankly in Raw is ridiculous. No one plays Beastmaster for that reason. Gloomstalker is slightly nerfed because their invisibility thing is very strong. Rogues have a slight buff. They get an extra talent point at level 3. We felt a bit like, given that we stack expertises, which was one of the rogues thing, rogue and bard, they needed that, and also rogues tend to scale off a little bit later game. Assassin has gotten a little buff where they can ignore immunity and treat it as resistance. Inquisitive has a buff. Thief has a buff. Rogue in general is slightly buffed in the Realm Beyond. This one has been changed or will be changed. We're not going to go over that. Wild Magic is changed pretty much because in TRB, every caster has a fumble chance. The way the weave is set up in the Realm Beyond is that it's very unreliable. So any spell can misfire, and that prevents spellcaster from... We want to incentivize players to think creatively about stuff, and when every spell has a small chance of misfiring, which can cause devastating effect, or just a quirky effect, or maybe even some good effect, the Wild Magic Sorcerer kind of thrives in this. Every time they get a spell fumble, which is on your spell fumble die, which starts off as a d12 normally, but then goes down. So let's say you roll a 1 on a d12. Then your d12 goes down to a d10, and if you roll 1 on the d10, it goes down to an 8. However, if you're a Wild Magic Sorcerer, you cap at a d8, so you can never go back higher. And if you roll the max on the number goes up again. And every time they roll a 1, they get a Taste of Chaos, which makes them re-roll any attack, ability check, or saving throw that they do. And these can stack to a maximum amount equal to their spellcasting modifier. However, they do reset on a long rest. Storm Sorcerers can trigger their Tempestuous Magic, which is their little levitation float on cantrips, but only from level 3. Repelling Blast and Grasp of Hadar didn't have a save in Raw, which is pretty ridiculous that you can push creatures that are way past the mass. You can push a Tarrasque or whatever without any attempt to save. So we added a save there where the chance of succeeding differ depending on the size of the creature. We've removed Devil Sight, and that is mainly because Devil Sight creates the Devil Sight Darkness combo is such a cheesy combo, and it's not really fun to play. It's very tactical. It's a good way because you basically have perma advantage and the enemy has perma disadvantage, unless they got like Tremor Sense or Blunt Sense or something like that. But it's just not fun. It draws out combat. Combat takes so much longer, and it's like by removing it too, we don't have enemies that do that to the players. A fight that normally would take 30 minutes may take 90 minutes because of that simple change. Wizards can create their own spell books. This is mainly a thing for prisoners that arrive without any equipment. We also have the Pasha's feature, I think it is, changing cantrips. Blade Singer slightly nerfed. Let's see. Graviturgy, School of Graviturgy can adjust density as a bonus action, which makes it much more usable in actual combat and used creatively. Homebrew Mechanics. Here we head into Sanity, and the way Sanity works, a long story short, is you may see something that's extremely disturbing. Let's say a corpse rising from the grave, for instance. If you haven't seen an undead before, that's pretty fucked up. So you roll a Sanity save. If you fail, you lose current Sanity depending on how harsh it was. For instance, I think seeing a corpse rise is a d6 plus 1. Say you roll a 5 and your max sanity is 12. That means you now have 7 out of 12 max sanity. If your current sanity goes down to 0, you get a minor sanity. And these are things that doesn't last short time. If you fail a sanity save, you get a short-term sanity condition. And they can be that you're blabbering gibberish, you're screaming, you're frightened, you're running away, you're attacking an ally, all kinds of things. But they usually are very short-lived, and other characters can help you shake awake, which is basically breaking from sanity. So you try to shake your ally awake and be like, what the fuck? And maybe they can retain their sanity and get back into business. But it kind of plays on a little bit of the horror elements of TRB. Um, but once you go down to 0, you lose a max sanity, and then you get nastier things that doesn't just disappear after a few rounds of turmoil. Things that can last for hours or days even, and you usually need to spend downtime to get rid of it. Basically, relaxation and taking a break from adventuring, meditating. I don't know, getting drunk on the taverns, recuperating kind of. We also have corruption, which is a global curse that exists in this plane and in this plane only, which is basically a remnant from the event called the Dark Ages and the Greater Nine. And it's basically a sickness that slowly corrodes the soul of the user, turning them into kind of an undead. It rots their eyes away, their skin turns gray, blackened vein pops up, and they lose their teeth, kinda. And it's contagious, so people generally try to stay away from you if you have it. There is cure to it, but the cure is very expensive. We have a 500 GP component cost on the remove curse, and so many people cannot afford that. But once you get high levels, you eventually turn into a hollow, which is basically a soulless being that follows the wishes of the Greater Nine indirectly. The spell fumbles I've already gone through, but you can read a little bit more about them here. Injuries in TRB is much more severe than in vanilla. We do count negative hit points, so you can go below 0, and you don't auto stabilize on 3 successful death saves. All it does is postpones death. So basically, because realistically, if you were stabbed into an unconscious state, you're probably bleeding, you have internal wounds, you're probably not gonna stabilize on your own. You need someone to tend to you, unless a miracle happens, and that's the nat 20 death save. If you nat 20 is a death save, you get stabilized and you get back up to 1 HP. But yeah, that's a small chance. So you enter a state in TRB called bleed out, which basically means that each turn, no matter if you save or not save, you lose 1 hit point. If you fail a death save, you lose 2. If you fumble it or nat 1 it, you lose 3. And in addition to the bleed out, you also get death saves. So, but if your bleed out enters, I think it's negative max hit point or minus 25, whatever comes first, you're dead. You don't restore. You need healer's kit to expend healing pool, or hit die as they call it raw. At the end of a long rest, you regain all your healing pool. You restore less if you trance or sleep in medium or heavy armor, unless you got a talent for it that fixed that. Every time you go into unconscious or take more of half your hit points, you also get a lingering injury, which is something that requires you to be at full HP and then receive a little bit of overhealing to get rid of. That could be stuff like broken finger, horrible scar, festering wound, all kinds of things that are minor imposes you in some way. Also playing on lethality and realism. Then we have the major injuries. They occur when you take critical damage or enter bleed out from a critical injury. They usually require higher levels of restoration to get rid of, or a bunch of downtime in a hospital. We have this table, which may seem slightly complicated, but it's basically when you stabilize someone and they have the bleed out status. If you succeed and remove the bleed out status, you also cure some of the negative HP, depending on the degree of success. So let's say someone is on 12, negative 12, you roll a 17 total, then you subtract 5, or you give them 5 HP because you rolled 5 higher. So they're now on -7 and stabilized, so they're not bleeding out. There's also a talent that can let you stabilize people all the way back to 1 instead of 0. So for instance, if your degree of success is high enough to grant them up to 0, they get back to 1. So healers or medics without being a spellcaster medic, which is something accessible from the talent tree, being a normal doctor, is very valued in TRB, especially early game. Also have some rules for lycanthropy, but they are very rare. We don't award downtime the same way as many other Westmarches do, whereas they say, oh, you after this session you get a week of downtime, and you get a week of downtime after this session. We tend that kind of ruins immersion a little bit, because let's say one character can progress, be in 8 sessions and progress 2 months and do a bunch of shit, whereas another player maybe not play, and they're still on the same day, even though a lot of things have changed. So the way that works is that each character has a timeline. You're on a date, your character can be on day 230, another character may be on day 240. If you then play together the 230 and the 240, the 230 is going to be pushed up to the 240 and accumulate 10 downtime days throughout that time. A character may choose to progress even further ahead, up to what we call the maximum DTD. And this changes with our regular patch notes every month. We up this. So that's how far a character can advance. We also have a spawn day, which is the day new character spawned on, and a minimum DTD, which is how far a character can be back. So for instance, if you haven't been able to play, try to at least every 3 months or so spend some downtime if you want to keep that downtime. We want to keep the player base within a reasonable amount of time. I think it's now about 120 days in game, from the min to the max, because there are a bunch of global events and the world is constantly changing, and that just makes it easier. We also have reputation. So for instance, if you do quest to certain factions, you can get reputations. And reputation can be used for all kinds of things. Minor services, sometimes item discounts, and copying spells. Certain factions, anyone can do downtime to work for. Let's say you want to work for some blacksmiths, or you want to work for a city guard, or maybe in a library or a tavern. Those things anyone can do. But there are certain organizations that are quest locked, which basically requires some form of introduction into them. The reputation for these factions are usually valued higher, like governmental Acroshia state factions is an example of that. Cults, probably another. It's not something where you can just go knock the door and ask if you can work, you know. So yeah, that's how reputation works. Inspiration in TRB is rewarded many sessions at the end of them, not every session, but they can be used to reroll any roll. It can be used to reroll enemy crits, your own rolls, your allies' rolls, any roll in the game. But you can maximum have 3 of them at the same time. You can gain, if you write a backstory, you can gain 1. The backstory gets approved in a channel on Discord. So a good way to increase your survival chances is writing a backstory for your character. Then we have this, which is the TRB, the special currency. I'm sorry. I just had to cough. All right. It's kind of a loyalty token, more so that even if you play a lot and maybe you die, you will get something out of it. So by attending sessions, you're rewarded TRB at the end of a session, 1 to 3. And that depends on how well the roleplay was and how much story progressing you did as a group. If it's a good session, people stay in character, the story was progressed, you usually get a 3. If something is lacking, you get a 2. And if it overall was just bad and you didn't do much, there was a lot of metagaming, you may get a 1. And that is assigned by the GM at the end of each session. The GM also earns TRB between 2, 3, and 4 with similar metrics, where the players kind of create. We want to incentivize an open space where feedback can be taken and given, both in between players and GMs, to improve the standards of the games. So at the end of each session, we have a feedback where a GM gets to receive feedback from what the players liked and what they didn't like, and what could have maybe be done differently. But as I said before, this is nothing we do in the midst of sessions. This is something we do towards the end of them. At the end of sessions, unlock tokens may also be handed out by the GM. Inspiration is usually for pushing the story forward or doing something that contributes to the story, whereas the unlock tokens has more to do with staying in character or role-playing your character. Characters also gain hero points upon level ups, and they can be used to reroll things that affects you but not other people, so they're different to inspiration. However, they can also be used if they're pooled in a party to either automatically stabilize or take extra turn. But that's very expensive, and that is like one of the last resources you burn generally. We do not count experience per kills. We think that's silly. We don't want to incentivize people to be murder hobos. Instead, we have something called milestone experience, which is a mixture of milestone progression and experience, which measure things like solving conflicts with diplomacy, what kind of effect you have on a region or city, if you solved a puzzle and discovered, stole something, saved people. There are all kinds of things. And this is something that the players really should think about. This is more of a GM thing. All characters have access initially to two characters per player. And more slots can be done by either starting to GM with us or supporting us through Patreon. You can also archive characters, meaning let's say you played a character and you're a bit bored of them and maybe you want to play something else. You don't have to just throw the character away. You can archive the character. The character can't be played for 30 in real life days, and they're pushed on the timeline for 30 days. But then you could take them in again. So the character is basically out of game, not doing anything, but they're not dead. However, for instance, if you're hospitalized with a major injury, let's say your character gets some severe injury, needs to stay 30 days in a hospital, then you can archive them and still be in the hospital throughout that process. We have an occasionally used bidding system for sessions, and that's basically used to have people play more than they did before. Previously, we had so that patrons could get priority for games much higher than others and kind of kick players, but we found that that didn't work as well. So what we decided to do is have a bidding system. If there are more people interested in a session, then there are slots. The GM has assigned slots for the game. Let's say you have 7 people interested, but the GM only want to run a 5-person game. Then you start bidding these points. So the more you bid for this game, the less you have to bid for the next game. So those missing out on this game has a bit extra resources to bid on the next game. And we find that works very well and fair. If you're a new player on the server, you have the deprived status, and any bids you do for the first 3 games counts as infinite. So basically, we want to integrate many new people and welcome them in. So the first 3 games are basically no bids, you guaranteed slot, pretty much. Heading back to the TRB coins, it is a currency that can be used to do things. Sometimes we have competitions or challenges which you can earn extra TRB from. If you write session summaries, you can also get TRB for. If you don't show up without any notice, you lose TRB. And basically what you can do for them is you can increase your current sanity to max sanity by spending TRB and downtime or a combination of them. You can raise your max sanity. You can get contacts. You can get gold. You can increase your attributes or get talent points, but these 2 are expensive. And you can reset your talent tree. So it's like a little bonus. It doesn't really do super much. Certain races also has TRB costs associated with them. And we also have bumping. So bumping means that you level up a character and start at a higher level initially. So for instance, if you want to bump a commoner to level 1, that costs you 20. If you want to bump a prisoner to level 2, it costs 20. And these stacks. So for instance, if you want to go from commoner to level 3, that will set you back 70. And you will get these things. That's the biggest drawback of bumping generally, is that you start with less wealth than a character that would have gone through all those sessions to get to that level. Alright, this is big. I need some water for this. Combat changes. There's a bunch of them. But I'm just going to go through them one by one as fast as I can while still trying to be clear. Flanking doesn't grant advantage. That's way too strong. Instead, it gets +1 for each ally. You need to draw a line through your token and the enemy to the other character, then you know you're flanking. So you can get, depending if it's a bigger creature, you can get maybe +5, +6 flanking. If it's a small creature, you can get maybe +2, maybe 3. Natural 1s and 20s are not automatically hits or misses. AC matters. You can drop initiative once per combat, meaning that if you have an initiative of 18 but an ally goes at 15, maybe you want that ally to go before you can drop to 12. And this can be used very strategically or tactically, and is highly incentivized to do. Sources of disadvantage and advantage stack to cancel each other out. So for instance, if you have 2 sources of disadvantage, 1 of advantage, that results in a disadvantage. However, if you have 2 advantage and no disadvantage, it's still just advantage. If you pick up an item from the ground, a weapon or something, or try to stabilize someone, it triggers opportunity attacks from creatures that have you in their reach. So if you're kneeling down to stabilize the fighter that just got slashed by this enemy, that enemy is going to swipe at you. Because you're easy to hit. And you have no intention of protecting yourself at that point. Disengaging, however, allows you to pick up items without provoking attack of opportunity. When you attack with an equipped shield, we have shield fighter builds. You forsake that AC from that shield until your next turn. If you attack around a hard corner, that counts as half cover. The owls flyby is a little nerfed. It provokes disadvantage opportunity attacks rather than ignoring them, because they are pretty much perma advantage on attacks. You just fly in, do the help action, disengage, fly around a corner, full cover, and they're safe. That's generally how that's played. Yeah, grappling and shoving is easier against smaller things. You don't have disadvantage against prone targets if you're within 20 feet, given that the creature is medium-sized. For each size above medium, that increases. If you take damage, the minimal damage you take is 1. When you take the dodge action, any attack rolls you make are made at disadvantage until the start of your next turn. This is something we added in because we also have a tower shield, which is pretty strong if you're dodging. And we found a lot of people using attacks such as repost or the insight tree. Maybe this is pure gibberish if you don't understand the talent tree TRB runs with. But basically, the idea is that if you're choosing to be defensive, attacking is also harder. However, dual wielding is a little bit buffed. So if you crit on a dual wielding weapon, you may make an extra attack by expending your reaction with the opposite hand. So if I crit with my main hand, I can make a reaction offhand. If I crit with my offhand, then I make a reaction main hand attack. So you can get 3 attacks in, basically, if you crit with dual wielding. Medium and larger bodies count as difficult terrain, always, unless stated. A lot of these are just clarifications, things that has been brought up in games which we've documented, and this is by no means anything you as a player need to know of the base. If you're doing touch or unarmed attack while you're mounted on a smaller creature, you can't reach them pretty much because you're sitting. If you have a weapon without reach, you can't hit a prone target smaller than the mount. So, for instance, if you have a sword and you're sitting on a horse and someone is laying on the ground next to the horse, you can't hit them unless they are large or your weapon has reach. Frightened and stunned conditions can be broken similar to sanity conditions, and non-lethal attacks do not cause injuries. We run with shoot through, so basically, if you're shooting at someone behind an ally, the ally generally, unless they're small, counts as 3/4 cover, and you need to shoot with disadvantage in order to not hit them, or try to shoot at the 3/4 covered AC. Object interactions and free actions are synonymous. You have, just like raw, action, movement, bonus action, free action, reaction, but you can change actions into more free actions. But you can't do the opposite. You can't change a free action into a bonus action. However, you can, say, sacrifice half your movement to get an extra free action, or you can sacrifice your reaction to take an extra free action. And the free actions are usually used either to fiddle with objects in combat or to speak. When you speak, you can say 3 sentences in character. You can give them up to other ones. So, for instance, there's no metagaming in combat in TRB. Everything you coordinate needs to be said in character. So, speaking like, okay, are we retreating? Are we advancing? Which enemy do we focus? Stuff like that is very, very important, and often make or break combat encounters, actually. Using a potion is an action. Dropping a held item requires no action. Concentration check and injuries are based on damage to hit points, not temporary hit points. Let's see. Characters can have a number of magical items attuned to equal to their proficiency modifier. So once a character reaches level 9, they can have 4 items. Once they have a proficiency of +6, they can have 6 items. A character that's a resurrector suffers a shit ton of temporary sanity loss because dying is mind-breaking. And we also have a special fumble table for resurrection fumbles. So death, is very much an uncertainty in TRB. Just because someone can resurrect you doesn't mean you'll end up resurrected. You can cast multiple spells in TRB. You can Misty Step and Fireball the same turn. Fuck yeah. Let's see. Spell scrolls and imbued spells can be used by any class without check, trivia, or fumbles. Some spell casting. This is talent. Some spell changes. Crowd of Madness is buffed. It takes a bonus action to maintain instead of an action. No one uses that rule. It's a super cool spell. People should use it. Dispel magic dispels up to the caster level and does not dispel curses, because that's what remove curse does. Dispel magic, for instance, the reason is if you are a 5th level wizard and you come across a Lich's lair and he has put this fucking prismatic wall up or whatever, that's an 8th or 9th level spell, you still being a pretty adept mage should not be able to dispel that. You're just too weak. So you gotta cast similar to counterspell. You gotta match the level, or counterspell at least have a small chance to succeed. But Spare the Dying doesn't bring people to 0. Instead, they have the negative hit points they have. Sleep is slightly reduced because it's a very strong early game spell. It really trivializes encounters. Remove Curse has a material cost, which is consumed. Sanctuary requires concentration. Polymorph is just one of those auto-pick spells. It's so good. It's insanely good. Giant Ape, Rex, and it completely skews encounter building. So instead of the full CR level, it's half. Blade Ward is slightly buff and gives resistance. True Strikes is actually useful since the duration lasts a minute, so you can prep it before you charge into a room. Detect Thoughts only realized if they succeed on the save. Pass Without a Trace is really strong, especially on characters that already have high stealth. It's like a +10, so let's say you have a rogue with +10 stealth and you give them an additional +10, suddenly they have +20 stealth, and yeah, they can do whatever the fuck they want. It's just one of these attributes or the skills that's completely snowballs in terms of scaling. Back in older editions, numbers were usually more exponential, but Pass Without a Trace is one of those abilities that's still exponential. So the way we've done it is that it sets the stealth bonus to +10 instead of providing a +10. So if you're already good, it doesn't really do much, but if you're bad at stealthing, it helps a lot. So it's still good for a party in order to get past things. It just doesn't make the rogue completely undetectable. The material component of good burying is consumed. That goes into survival, kinda, because then they actually need to store up on material components and plan their travels instead of just having infinite food. Survival food is an amazing part of the game, which can provide a lot of enjoyment, but it's usually overlooked because the simplicity, the ease of just having one spell that solves that. Fireball is intentionally designed to be fucking badass. The developers have even admitted that. We think it's too strong though, because it turns from being one of a few good choices to being the only good choice. If you have an 8d6 20 feet radius, of course you're gonna take that. So now with this change, we see people picking between lightning bolt, this different spells, hypnotic pattern, maybe, I don't know. Witch bolt is buffed. So if you upcast in raw, the consecutive damage doesn't scale through upcast, which makes it horrible. So even though the first hit scales, the Witch Bolt is kind of a thing you're concentrating on and channel, like World of Warcraft Warlock's Drain Life kind of thing. And now we've nerfed the initial damage, but we've done so the secondary damage scales. Stone Skin does not require concentration. It's still quite expensive though. Should be noted that the Realm Beyond is a quite low wealth setting, so 100 GP components cost is actually a little bit. We also saw a very strong meta where people maxed out AC and went heavy armor with shield. So we have nerfed shield to be better on casters as originally intended. And because one of the things is in TRB you can actually, or I guess you can in raw by multi-classing too, but in TRB you can get heavy armor proficiency even as a sorcerer through talent trees or training downtimes and all kinds of stuff. So shield, the heavier your armor is, the worse the shield spell is, really. Disintegrate is not very fun. It's just a one-shot spell with no preventive measures. Like I said, we're a low wealth setting, and getting disintegrated, reduced to 0 hit points, and instantly dying, which is just literally a save or die effect, feels a bit unfair. So what we've done instead is that it dissolves a limb. It still has a 1 in 5 chance of blasting your head off, and then you're dead. But it can blast your arms or legs off. Plant growth can only be maintained at one location at a time instead of everywhere, because that's also it's like you have to keep in mind that Dungeons and Dragons weren't really designed to be played in a Westmarch format where you have 50 players playing at the same time, as it's a massive MMORPG kinda. So many of these spells were designed for the party to be the heroes, and the entire story revolves around this party. But in a Westmarch, it's so much bigger than that, and players generally take any approach they can find to exploit stuff. So if you can go around and bribe farmers and cast plant growths on all the farms every day, get a fuck ton of money, and it's like you gotta keep the bigger economics in mind too. Gentle repose. A corpse can't be moved to maintain the benefits of this. And that is basically to buff Raise Dead and not have Revivify to be the go-to. Because generally we saw Gentle Repose into Revivify over and over. Whereas this change basically means that the corpse is put to rest, it can't be turned undead on the current place it is, and then we return to Revivify it. Whereas the Raised Dead, it doesn't matter how rotten the corpse is, as long as it's intact you can revive it. And those are the major changes for the system as a whole. Then we also have property. Players can own different kinds of properties, have hirelings. I'm just going to breeze over this because you can read all this on your own time. Same for money loops or money exploits. When you sell items, you receive 50% of the value. Some costs have been changed. Spyglass has been reduced. Healer's Kit slightly upped. Staff upped. Breastplate is way overvalued in raw. Double scimitar reduced. Maul greatsword closer to each other. Certain things. We use variant encumbrance. Flying items count as a rarity higher. We have some in-setting drugs that may make sanity easier but give exhaustion or can create addictions. We have changed some costs to the firearms. We have a few additional types of shields. If you want to be a shield fighter, there's a shield fighter talent. So, for instance, the bladed bucklers kind of work like daggers you can slice with too. The spike targe you can slap as a reaction, and the tower shield basically provides half cover from rage attacks. Some costs if you want to buy spells of service, which are quite expensive. Some homebrew magical items. We don't have that many. We try to keep the homebrew we allow to be to incentivize different kinds of playstyle. We have the Emblem of the Waste, which is a pretty strong one. It's kind of aiming to avoid those save or die effects, because in TRB you usually fight very hard things. You can fight things with very high spell saves early on. Already at level 5 you can face very high CR things. And everything in 5th edition scales, except for the saves. They really don't scale that much unless you ASI change. So yeah, this kind of gives a bump to avoid the save or die things. We have a rare polearm to incentivize, because there's a lot of different swords or axes and stuff in 5e, but there's not many polearms. So we have 2 polearms, one uncommon, one rare. We have a kind of disguised self helmet. We have an adventurer's wand that can reveal secrets and identify stuff. We have a slapping bamboo stick and a rod of John, which is pretty fun. We have an alchemy jug, which once again could work as an infinite money exploit. So any liquid produced with advantage 24 hours after having been produced. The ever smoking bottle, a little bit similar to the Devil Sight Darkness combo, has been nerfed to 30 feet radius from 60. Have some mounts that can be trained or battle trained, different speeds. Battle trained basically means you don't need to make animal handling checks in combat with them. Some accessories, see things, crafting. Oh yeah, we have a pretty advanced crafting system too. I'm not sure if I should go over all this downtime, but I'm just gonna quickly glance on them, because you can do different downtimes in between sessions. You can roleplay in the tavern, or you can do downtime activities. One of them being carousing, that grants you contacts. It requires an upfront fee, how much you're willing to spend, and with that you can make hostile contacts or allied contacts, and then there's also complications that may occur. You can craft gear instead of buying it if you're a good craftsman, earn more money. We try to incentivize a player-driven economy so that players trade items in between themselves, craft and sell to each other, and stuff like that. So this is a little bit complex, but it should be worth mentioning that we have a software for this, so you basically just enter in everything you need and it spits out the results. You can craft potions, you can craft spell scrolls, you can sell items. Selling item doesn't happen instantly, you need to find a buyer, and the higher the rarity is, the harder it is to find a buyer. More downtimes. You can gamble if you feel lucky. You can do pit fighting if you're good at that. Relaxation to remove injuries, increase fumble die, restore ability scores. Let's say you've been strength drained, maybe take a week off and your strength returns. You can do religious service that gets religious favors but no money, which basically can add radiant damage to attacks, a little bonus to saving throws here and there. You can research into what's called either lore information about things or learning about schematics, which is basically recipe for magical items. So let's say you want to learn how to craft Cloak of Elvenkind. Then you need 3 parts of a recipe. So if you nail a 21 research, you can figure out the pieces needed to craft that item. Training, you can learn proficiencies or expertise in languages, skills, tools by spending money and time. And the most common one, which is kind of the go-to if you don't find that anyone else suits you, is simply working and earning gold. That's the most fast-forward one. And finally, we have laws of Acroshia, Acroshia being the country we're in. And whatever happens, depending on what crime you're found guilty of, and it's quite harsh punishment. Acroshia is a very authoritarian or totalitarian state that takes itself very seriously. But yeah, that is the basic rule rundown. And for a new player, to summarize, the main thing to think of is the commoner prisoner things. There are some things changes to different classes. We have sanity, we have corruption, but mostly this is just used for reference, and is more so the GMs that needs to be aware of it, not you as a player. So yeah, whether you're new or old, smash that subscribe button, give a like, and join us in the server. Link is in the description. Peace out.